The last thing we want to do to the boiler at this point is to add some trim. But before I do that, I notice here on the end that a couple of my little pieces are popping up. You might not be able to see that. But what I'm going to do is just put some white glue underneath any of those pieces that are sticking up and make sure they're staying down. And so I just thought I would mention that in case you have that issue as well. Alright, so to trim, we're going to use 1/4 inch strips of paper. I've been using this Steampunk Debutante collection, so I'm going to use 1/4 inch strips along this piece of paper, and it just fits to cut 1/4 inch strips, and then they kind of look like rivets. And in here you can see one option would be to just add, you could leave it plain, or you could add some glossy accents or something like that on each one of these dots just to make them up in relief a little bit. Or what I've done is I've just come and attached some little half pearl rounds to the middle of those dots. I think these are 4mm. And also you can see I've got all my strips have score tape on them. Before I cut them from this paper, I backed it with score tape so that it would be ready to go. I also did beef these up with just another piece of black cardstock just so they'd have a little relief from the from whatever part of the locomotive they're on. I considered using the lightweight chipboard, but I thought that was too much. Or you could just leave them thin. You know, that's definitely up to you, whatever choice you want to make. So to go around the boiler, we're first going to put one that goes right around the end of the boiler, and it butts up against the end of the cab. Now, if you're like me and you're using ones that have raised pearls or anything on them, it will be better if it's possible. Let's see if I can hold this for you. We're going to have a piece of chipboard that comes along here. In fact, I've got that cut already. This piece of chipboard is going to come right along here. So if we can make it so that the edge of the cab here, the bottom edge of the cab, is in the middle of any of the little pearls, or else the pearl is right on top, anywhere but if a pearl is right in the middle. Now, if you can't do that, and you know, that's the way it goes, and you can figure it out. I'll show you how to handle that. So I'm just going to see where that would be if I did that here, and mine will work around okay, I think. And so I'm just going to put a little tick mark over here so I know where to start. Now, what's right down here is not going to show for what comes in underneath this piece. It's going to come like this. That won't show. So you can see I don't have a pearl right there, and that's just fine. So I'm going to just go ahead and go for that. There we go. That's better. I'm going to get that right up against there. I'm just tacking it lightly to begin with. Then I can remove my score tape, come along, push it right up against that cab. Come down here. I can see about where I need to go and give this a trim. And then make sure you give that a good burnish. Now we're going to have 5 pieces of trim along here. The next one, and if your strips are cut at 2 1/4 inches, this will all work out fine. The next one is going to be 2 1/4 inches away from the first one, so I just cut a strip of paper to use as a guide here. So that'll help me be able to put my next strip on. So I'm just lining up my piece of trim with that piece of paper and working my way around. Again, I'll come down here and cut that off. Come lightly at first, so if you need to make any adjustments, you can. Now the next strips are going to be 1.5 inches apart. So I'm just going to take this piece of paper and cut it to 1.5 inches wide. So now this strip is 1.5 inches. And this one's going to go all the way around. So you may want to have a longer piece so that it meets down here at the bottom, so that you won't have any question about what's going on. I'm going to just make a slit there, and then if I come around here, and now I can see that those are in line there. So for this one, I'm going to see what happens when I have one that goes totally, and these are 12-inch strips, so there should be plenty long enough. And I'm just going to meet it down there in the center, and just do a butt joint down here where these two meet. So I'll do that, and then I'll be back. And then to do the last one, I again used my 1.5 inch spacer and put this one around. I have used, I don't think I've said this before, I've used some glossy accents or diamond glaze just at the ends of each one, just as some added insurance. And yeah, so that is the boiler up to this stage, and we'll be ready to move on to our side platforms. Now we're going to work on the two side platforms. Our cutting guide calls for us to cut 4 pieces of medium weight chipboard, and that's because we double these up. These are going to be double thickness. So I've got my two side platforms. I've already done the cutting on one, and let me show you how this is going to go on. If we turn our locomotive upside down, you can see there's a notch here. There's also a little notch back here at the back, and that is so that it can fit around the boiler up there at the front and come straight along there. It comes past the cab about 1/4 inch, and it's very important that when we do this, we make sure we line it up with the very back edge of the cab, this part that sticks out 1/8 inch, not the flush end of the not this part of the cab. So let's talk about how to measure for these notches. The first thing is to check, and for me, my notch is a 1/2 inch deep, and I check that by just taking a ruler up here and measuring how far out the boiler sticks, and a 1/2 inch gave me good clearance. So I knew that, and then we want to see how long to make that cut. So hold the side platform up against your locomotive. Make sure that the back edge of the side platform is even with this edge out here. The one that comes out the 1/8 inch pass, not this edge here, but comes out further. So I'll line that up. And once I'm happy with where that is, I'm just going to make a tick mark where the boiler is. Sorry, let me turn it this way. I'm making a tick mark right here where the edge of the boiler is. My pencil will work. There we go. So that comes to that edge, and I have this right here. So this part right here, I'm going to make an X on it just so I remember that that's what I'm going to cut out. So remember we said that it was a 1/2 inch, so I'm going to just take my ruler and mark a 1/2 inch, and then the length of it is up to this tick mark that I made. So I'll just draw that. So this will be our first notch right here to take that out. So I'll get that cut, and then I'll be back. The key to cutting accurately with this thick chipboard is to make sure that you keep your craft knife perpendicular to the surface. That's important anytime you're cutting chipboard, but it will be really noticeable with this double thickness if your craft knife gets at an angle. The other thing is, of course, to have a sharp blade. I never cut double thickness chipboard without making sure I have a sharp blade in my craft knife. So now that we've made this cut, we need to make the little notch at the end. The little notch at the end is going to be an 1/8 inch deep, and it's going to be 1 inch long, and it gets cut from the same side as the big notch. So if you wonder, you know, do I cut it from this end or from this end, it's from the same end that you cut this long notch from. So it's a 1 inch long and 1/8 of an inch deep. So I'll just mark that, and let's see, I'm going to cut it this way. So use a pen to show where this is. So it's 1/8 inch deep and 1 inch long. So cutting out that little notch so that it will end up looking like this one. And you can see that they could be, once you cut one, you know, flip it around, see if it's going to work on the other side. Then it should, because if everything is kept square, your dimensions should be the same. So I'm just going to cut this little notch out, and then I'll be back. So now we're ready to talk about decorative paper. And because I'm using this darker brown colored here, I'm going to do a little preliminary inking on my platforms. I'm just going to come and hit these corners down by the little end notch and down here at this end. Because of the way we're going to wrap this, The corners may peek through, and I just would prefer if they kind of blended in. So I'll just do that quickly on both of these pieces. And then for the decorative paper, we'll cut 2 strips that are 3 7/8 wide, and cut at the length of the paper, 12 inches. But then you'll cut a 10-inch section that we'll use for the big wrap, and then you'll have a section that's 2 by 3 7/8. You'll have 2 of those left over. Now from one of them, we'll cut some strips that are 1 1/8 inches wide, 1 1/8 inches wide, and then from that subcut it so that you've got one piece that's 1 1/4 inch long and one piece that's 3/4 inch long. And I'll explain what's happening here so you understand the math. We're going to take the little 3 3/4 by 1 1/8, and it will wrap around this little notch that we made at this end. So I'll show you the scoring in a second. And then the bigger piece is going to wrap around this end down here at the end. So if your pieces aren't exactly, if your notches aren't exactly 3/4 inch and 1 1/4 inch, you'll want to adjust your cutting so that they match. Okay. And then the scoring for those pieces is to score with the 1 1/8 inch side up at the top, to score at 1/2 inch, and then to score again at 5/8 inch. And that will allow you to have 2 1/2 inch tabs plus a channel in the middle that is the thickness of the double chipboard. And then what I've done as well, once I've cut that, I think you can see here on the ones that are done, that I've just come back and angled slightly. Leave the 1/8 inch side totally square, but just come and angle slightly so that those pieces won't interfere with the wrapping on the big piece. So we'll have these 2 pieces for each one. And let's go ahead and wrap those on. Also I inked the edges after I cut them here. So I'll just put that right up against the corner, remove one side, and wrap that around, and of course give that a good burnish, and then do the same thing for this other end. And I'll burnish those and then be back to talk about what's next. So first I'm going to score my paper at 1 7/8 and then at 2 inches. And doing that will give us an 1/8 inch channel in the center and 2 sides that are 1 7/8 inch long. So I'm just going to set that aside for a moment. And then bring in my Locomotive. When this side platform goes on, we're going to glue it to the bottom of the cab, but then we need a couple of joining strips to add it to the boiler. We'll put one in between this section here, and then we'll put one down here at the end. So what we want to do is take a measurement, make sure your end is lined up nice and even down there, and then take a measurement from the inside of this strip of trim to the end of the platform. So on mine, that is 1 3/8 from the inside of this trim here to the end of the platform. That's 1 3/8. Write that down before I forget. And then you can set the platform aside for a second and just measure how long this is in between these two. We know that should be 2 1/4 inches because that's how we spaced out our trim here. So we've got one at 2 1/4 and one at 1 3/8 in my case. Yours may be a little bit different. So from one of the other strip of leftover decorative paper, and now from our other strip of leftover paper that we had from cutting our long sheet, that we have a piece that's 2 inches by 3 7/8. So first I'm going to just cut this in half. So I'll have 2 pieces at 1 inch wide. And then, get this out of the way, we can score those in half. Now we're done with our scoring board. And then we'll add score tape to the right side of the paper. Now I'm using 3/8 inch tape, but I'm holding it right to the edge because I want to have an 1/8 inch gap on either side of that scoring line. So let me put this tape on the other side here. So again, this is the right side of the paper. And so you can see I've got like a 1/4 inch in here in the middle because I've held my tape back. So I'll do that for my other piece. And then, so then I can cut the 2 lengths of joining strip that I need, which in my case were 2 1/4 and 1 3/8. I'm going to cut them both just a little, like a 1/16 of an inch shorter than that. And then I'll be back. So you can see that I have both of my platforms here, and I have them set up so that they're a mirror image. I did write top on both of them when I cut them out so that I wouldn't be in danger of making 2 that were exactly the same, which would be a problem. So I'm going to just set one aside for now. And I've put tape around the edges here. We're going to start out by adhering the decorative paper to the top, and I'm just checking to make sure that the 10-inch length is correct and working with what I have, and it is. So I'm ready to go ahead and join this to the, attach the pattern paper. I'm just going to put a little bit of temporary adhesive on the other side, so then I can get it in place, and I'll remove my score tape backing and get this adhered, and then I'll be back. So now I have my paper attached to the top, and I'm going to take some score tape and put it along this edge where the notch is. And then cut that notch out. Well, I shouldn't say cut that notch out. I just want to make a slit right here along the edge of that notch, because we want to do is wrap this. I'm also going to just kind of cut that back just a little bit here. I'm going to start cutting it back about 1/8 of an inch away from where it meets the chipboard, to allow for the thickness there. And then before I'm going to hit that edge with some ink, and then remove that score tape backing, and go ahead and wrap that around. Try to get a nice crisp edge on there. And we'll give that a burnish. Okay. So now for these other two edges here, we can just trim that even with the chipboard. So now let's just see what we've got going on. So that's how that's going to fit along here. This edge here, I'm just going to hit with some ink. We could have wrapped that, I guess, by mitering that corner, but I think this will be fine. It's not going to show that much. And then, okay, so now we're ready to flip and work on the underside. So for the underside, we want to, again, get some temporary adhesive and just fold this over. And make a mark along this edge that we just wrapped. You can also make a mark along this edge right here. Now I'm going to peel that off, and for this long line I'm going to cut just inside of it, just on this side of it. So this piece is going to come off, and I'm going to cut on the left side of that line. Bigger ruler. Just slightly, maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so. And then just cut directly on this line that's down, that goes the other direction. So we've removed this strip. Now I'm going to ink these edges. So now we're ready to add our joining strips. And to figure out the placement, we'll take our Locomotive here and make sure you get this end lined up with the back edge here. Because your notch may not be perfect, you can see here I've got a little bit of a gap, not very much, but just a little. But it's more important that this gets even on the back edge here. And then I just have a couple of Post-its that I can use to help me mark where the edges of that trim comes in, so I'll know how to place my joining strips. There's for that one, and then this one at the front will go here. So then I know that I'm going to put a joining strip, of course, down here at the end, and then in between here. Okay. So then we'll take our joining strips and remove one side of the tape backing. And you can use that shininess of the score tape to help you align it, because you want to have that 1/8 of an inch that we left. You hold it this way, you can see what you're doing. Center this in between the Post-it notes, and then have that 1/8 of an inch showing there. So let me see if I can get this on, and then I'll show you what I talk about. Alright, so my joining, and I've just put this down lightly. My joining strip is centered in between the post-it notes, and it's hard to see on this dark paper, I know, but here's my 1/8 inch coming right there. So that when we put this on like this, we'll be able to use this to join down here at the bottom, and it'll be very unnoticeable on the top. Don't know if I can hold this angle right, but it's not very noticeable at all on the top because it's in shadow and then it matches. And so then our other one that goes down here at the end, this one, I'm just going to, that's the right size, and I'm going to make sure I've inked the ends so that they won't show. And again, I'm holding it back just a little bit from the end here, and I want to make sure that my 1/8 inch of the near the crease shows. So use your cutting mat, use your calibrated eyeball or something to get that on there right. And again, I'm just going lightly to begin with. Now I can get my post-its out of the way and test this, making sure I line it up flush with the end of the cab at the right end, and then yeah, those tabs are going to work out well. Now I'm also going to trim this one up here. Is not going to show at all. There's no worries with that. This one we're going to cover up with some pattern paper, but I'm just going to cut this back at a slight angle right there on that end and ink that. Okay, so now that we have these joining strips on, we can continue with wrapping the underside here. So here's my score tape placement on the chipboard. It's along this long edge, this edge, and these edges back here, and on the paper it's on the front edge and along that cut edge. So I'll remove my score tape backing and then get this attached, and I'll be back. And then our last thing to do is to cut out the paper that is excess next to these chipboard edges. And do any inking if you've got any cracking or anything going on. And then next we'll put this in place. To put our side platforms in place, we'll first put some wet glue underneath the cab back here. And when we put this in place, remember that your tabs are coming off the underside, and that this edge here should line up with the edge of your cab. Give that some pressure, and we'll let that set up before we join these two tabs down here. And then once the glue has set up, we can come in and remove the tape backing from the tabs. And then when we go to put those tabs on, we'll want to make sure that the platform is level. So if you have a level, you can use that to make sure it gets on there level. And if you don't, then you can take a measurement from your work surface to the bottom of the platform back here at the cab, and make sure you use the same measurement up here at the front to get your platform level. And I'm just going to use my level here. I'm just tacking in the front one lightly first, then I can flip it up and get that one securely attached, and then attach the back one. Of course, you'll come in and burnish. And then the last thing to do is to cover up these tabs here in the front. So you want to measure the width, and it should be 1.5 inches, but just measure to make sure. And then in order to see how long a piece of paper to cut, I just like to use a little scrap of paper kind of as a ruler. I can come over here and make a tick mark, and then I can use this measurement. I'm going to cut a piece of the paper that I used for the boiler to this width times the length that I just measured here. And then once you've cut your paper, just back it with some score tape and go ahead and get it attached. And we'll give that a burnish. And now we can't see the joins underneath there. And we have our side platforms installed.